Hey, beautiful friend, it's Marnie, and welcome back to Life is Delicious. Today, I have the privilege of talking with a lovely guest. Her name is Mershon Neisner. She is an author and a certified life coach. She writes the Ask the Life Coach column for the Coastal Breeze News and has published 4 books. Her first book, Mom's Gone, Now What?, was published on her 75th birthday. And she just completed her 4th book, It's Mostly Good to Be Martha, and it was released just before she turned 80. She is a vibrant force, and her books and her life are a reflection of how to age with vitality and to never lose one's zest for living. So if you've ever thought that you're too old to start something new, this episode is for you. We're going to be talking about why it's never too late to start that something new. Stick with us. Welcome to this episode of Life is Delicious. I'm Marnie Martin, and I'm so glad you're here. And if this is your first time here, welcome to the Life is Delicious family. This podcast isn't about surviving midlife. It's about crafting your next chapter life, overflowing with purpose, joy, and delicious possibilities. Listen, midlife doesn't have to be a crisis. It can be a beautiful invitation to remember who we are, to rediscover a new version of ourselves, or to completely reinvent our life to reflect who we are becoming now. So if you're tired of being exhausted, living life on autopilot, and putting everyone else first, then you are in the right place. Each week, we'll bring you thought-provoking ideas and practical strategies, as well as inspiration to help you prioritize yourself again. It's time to take back your joie de vivre. So grab a notebook and pen and pop in those earbuds, and let's go get it. As we all know, life isn't always delicious. And one of the only constants we have in life is that things are always changing. Life can be a beautiful mess of twists and turns. And as we grow through each unique season of life, our needs change, our goals change, our priorities change, and our responsibilities change. And sometimes when the really hard stuff shows up, as it inevitably will, we can find ourselves lost and without a clear direction. Sometimes that can happen when we've had a huge life transition, like a divorce or a diagnosis, or we realize that our babies are all grown up and ready to be out on their own. And sometimes it can be a subtle or not so subtle restlessness that tells us we're ready to step into a bigger, bolder, more authentic version of ourselves. But one thing is for sure, we can't transition into what's next happily until we get really clear about what's weighing us down, what lights us up, and what we truly want when our soul whispers its truth. Happy is Not an Accident is a guided journal created to bring you back home to your truest self, to remember who you are, and to give you a safe place to explore and reflect on where you've been, where you really want to go, and who you want to become now. With deep, inspiring prompts, thought-provoking questions, and powerful exercises to help you excavate your most authentic self, Happy is Not an Accident will be the daily ritual that you look forward to as you step into this next awesome chapter of life. Give yourself the gift of self-reflection and create this beautiful life of yours on purpose and with intention. Get your copy or one for somebody that you love at lifeisdelicious.ca/happy. Welcome, Mershon. I'm so grateful to have you here on the show today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no worries. It's been such an honor to kind of learn about your story. And one of the things we wanted to talk about today is that you became an author when you were 75 for the very first time. Now, I know that's not the first time you've reinvented yourself, so maybe give us a quick overview of your story and some of the hats you've worn over your life.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I guess I hadn't thought about it being sort of historical before. You know, when you and I talked, we talked about me publishing my first book at 75, and that's how I think of this for reinvention. But as I was looking back, I realized that even when I very first started a career, I had graduated from college early, so I was 21 and just gotten married, but I had a teaching degree, but it was December, so I was waiting to teach, and I came across an opportunity to be a social worker. So that was kind of the first reinvention, was from planning to be a teacher to becoming a social worker. And then I was home with kids for many years after that. And then once again at about 43, I reinvented myself again as a marketing communications. I had a business, an entrepreneur, and I had no experience. I had no training. I walked out the door and said, this is who I am. And I printed up pink business cards. Now, this was the era when women were trying to emulate men in business. So they wore little ties and suits. And here I was with my pink business card. But it worked, and I had a successful business. And then that morphed into coaching, and I became a certified life coach, and then started writing. There's been a lot of changes, as most people have. Most people have diversity in their careers.
Yeah, and I think it's not uncommon for us to have sort of seasons in our life and chapters where we, do a certain thing and then we kind of master that, and we grow maybe out of that particular situation, and maybe it's time for us to challenge ourselves again.
Exactly. And I guess the only thing that would be unique about me is I'm 80 and I'm, I just published my fourth book and I'm pretty close to finishing up my fifth. So that might be a little unusual, but if you really look it up, there are a lot of people that did things as oldsters, as I would say.
Of course, but it's so inspiring because there are a lot of people who kind of struggle with being able to let their talents show and to be able to bring things out. They think, I'm too old to try that. Old dogs don't learn new tricks, all those things we get stuck with. And it's so not true. So it's always really interesting and inspiring to watch somebody take on their own dreams and to say, I can do that. And I know when we talked on the phone, one of the things that I thought was super inspiring is sort of how you got into writing. So that was a really cute story. So tell us how that began.
Sure, I'd be glad to. In fact, it's really in honor of the woman who I met. It's in honor of her 88th birthday, which was this week. Anyway, at the time, I still live in Florida during the most of the year, 8 months out of the year. And at the time, though, I lived in a house on a cul-de-sac, and there were a couple of empty lots across the street. So we kind of made it our business if we saw someone kind of wandering around, and I saw this woman. And so I went up to her and introduced myself, and come to find out she owned the property across the street. But 2 hours later, we had exited the middle of the street and ourselves in front of my pool and just talked. And at the end of those 2 hours, she was very definitively told me that I needed to write a book. I needed to join her writers group, her critique group, and when was I going to get started? She's really, her name is Virginia Reed, R-E-A-D, consequently, and she's a force to be reckoned with. She has an amazing background and, actually was in the CIA in the 50s. I mean, really an amazing woman, but she's someone, when she says you do it,
Okay.
So that was May, and I came back to Illinois, and I started writing a book, just like that. And that's how my first book came about initially.
Nice. And was she able to sort of help you with the process of getting the publishing happening and to be able to sort of mentor you in that way?
No, she never published a book. She had always been a writer, and she had lots of stories she'd written, and actually she used to write back in the day. She summarized and wrote the daily news report for the President of the United States and his cabinet every morning.
Wow, that's super interesting.
And I always thought that was so cool, and she's like, no, I was just a housewife. Anyway, but she never published a book, but because she steered me to her writers group and her critique group, I met people who had published books, who were writers. And then fairly early on, I went to Jackson Hole Writers Conference 2 years in a row, where I really learned more about the craft. So that's how it progressed. And I was very intent on traditionally publishing that first book, and was kind of on my way. I had a bit of interest from agents, etc. And then COVID came along. And because I had interviewed 50 women about their mother-loss stories, I felt a huge responsibility in terms of getting this book out into the world and getting it published. And so, right in the middle of COVID, I decided to self publish. And it was actually published on my 75th birthday, July the 2020.
Great.
Yeah, and then, I just did a lot of Zoom. I mean, I launched a book via Zoom, and it was all okay. It was all okay.
Well, it's so interesting how many people either found COVID to be crippling or they looked at it as a whole new opportunity to do something in a different way and to find a zig or a zag to a situation that maybe would have been, not happening otherwise. So I think that's amazing that you actually still continue to take that initiative and find a way to put it together. Now, your first book was the one you're speaking about, and I know it was about that your story is that you lost your mom when you were 8 years old, and so I can't imagine, I just lost my mom this year, so I imagine that was very good to be able to bring that to light and to shed some light on that for other people who've gone through that situation. So tell us about the interview process with the women that you worked with and how that all kind of came together.
Well, it's kind of interesting because, well, first of all, I'm the motherless daughter of a motherless daughter. So my mother's mother died when she was 2, and then my mother died when I was 8. And they're unrelated. It wasn't a related illness or anything. But when I first wrote my book, that summer after I was convinced by Virginia that I needed to do it, I wrote a book. It was mostly my story. I sent it to my editor, who was phenomenal. And she said, "Do you want to write a memoir or do you want to write a self help book?" And I said, "I want to write a self help book." And she said, "Well, this is a memoir." So I went back and completely redid it. Now, I kept the memoir aspect in terms of my own story, but I interviewed 50 women that had had loss of all different kinds at all different ages. Um, Alzheimer's, suicide, even murder, of course, various illnesses. Anyway, and so that's how that came together. And then through those interviews, that's how the 10 steps, it's 10 steps to help daughters move forward. And those 10 steps just grew out of those interviews. It's interesting because I'm just now putting together a program, a 4-week program on memoir writing. So for a senior living place here in Illinois, it's the largest senior living in Illinois, actually 1,000 residents. But I'm doing a memoir writing class, and it's kind of ironic because that's how I started. Essentially, was writing a memoir, and now I'm going to be teaching it. So it's been
Well, I
fun.
love that so much because what's really fascinating is that a lot of those people that you are going to be teaching the class to have stories to tell. And it's amazing, just like you may not have told your story if somebody hadn't given you a little nudge, that you can now be that inspiration for others.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, I'm really excited about it, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, and you know what I love is that I've heard so many different scientific studies that talk about how our brains stay healthier and are less prone to memory loss and dementia and all variety of diseases and ailments by staying creative and being able to keep a part of your brain active. And writing a memoir would be a fantastic way to do that, to go back down through their memories. And what a wonderful thing to be able, what a gift to be able to give to those residents.
Yeah, well, yeah, I hope so. And I think you're absolutely right, Marnie, in terms of the creative aspect. That's one that I think, helps keep people young or just keeps people sharp. So there's the creative part. And then there's also the learning something new. And that was one of the things that I'm challenged myself for this summer. I went to this senior living place, which, by the way, I had been chairman of their board of directors years ago. So I was very familiar with them. But so I went in and I said, I'd love to teach this class. I'd love to do a program on kind of reinventing yourself a little bit like what we're doing right now. And they said, sure. Well, then I had to come back and create these. It wasn't like I had them in the can.
Well,
So,
that's the best way to do it. That's the best way to do it.
so I'm challenging myself to not only continue to be creative, but also I want to challenge myself to do new things and learn new things. So I've had to learn about memoir writing in more detail than I might have known before.
Yeah, well, that's fantastic. Well, good for you for continuing to challenge yourself. I think that's brave and says a lot about who you are, just because, not everybody does that. It's
Yeah. Oh,
definitely,
thank you.
you have to take your own initiative, right? And you have to sort of drive your own bus.
I like that. Yes, for sure. For sure.
So tell us about this new book your last book. It sounds fascinating, and I know it's the name of a friend of yours that I think you just said had turned 98. Tell us a little bit about how that book became inspired.
Well, that's a cute story too. When I was at a book club that had just read my third book. No, they had just read my second book, which was The Bootmaker's Wife, which, by the way, I wrote that during COVID because I was getting bored waiting for my Mom's Gone book to be done. It has to be designed and all that. So anyway,
Wow, you're a
done,
writing machine.
they had done The Bootmaker's Wife for their book club. So we discussed it and, we were having a good time. And they said, what's next? And I said, well, I'm pretty well underway for the prequel. And I told them about that, about that book. And then that's Angie, the bee lady. And then they said, what's next? And I'm like, good grief, folks. Isn't that enough? I looked out onto these women, and it was about 20, 25 ladies. They were probably 60 to 85 years old. They were all vibrant. They had all these cute outfits on. They were just these cool ladies. And I just, on the spur of the moment, I said, I'm going to write a book about a fun, feisty older lady. And they cheered. They literally cheered. And that was enough motivation for me to come home and start my book called It's Mostly Good to Be Martha.
Oh, I love that story. That's so great. Well, see, you've had a lot of little bits of nudges of inspiration all through your life, very organic ones. So this must be the path you're meant to be on.
Oh, it is for sure. Absolutely. And every job I've had, everything I've done, I've really loved it. And when I get bored or get even when it comes to a genre of a book, if I get bored with one genre, I just move to another. That's not good for marketing particularly, but I don't care. I want to do what I love.
Well,
I
exactly. You've earned the right to do whatever you want. And you know what?
Exactly.
And that's important also to do what's inside your soul, not just what somebody else thinks is the next thing that's going to sell, right? Because
Exactly.
yeah, it's the creative process and it's self-expression and it's joy and it's all of the good things that keep you vibrant and alive, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So tell us a little bit about this Martha.
Oh, Martha. Well, I really like Martha. She's kind of me in 10 years, I guess. She burnt the pot, and that's what got her into assisted living because she was living in Iowa by herself, and she literally burnt the pot. The fireman had to come, and it was quite the deal. And so her very conservative, uptight lawyer's son, he said, that's it. You're moving. And so he uprooted her from Iowa, took her to Poughkeepsie, New York, which is where he lived, and installed her into an assisted living. Well, it was pretty abrupt and shocking, but she didn't really mind because right away she made friends and she established a life. And then things started happening, mysterious things. So she really became kind of an amateur sleuth. Sometimes it was because in one case she was accused of abducting her friend Harold and stashing him away somewhere. So she had to solve that case. And then there was a snatcher in the region. So she volunteered to be a decoy for the purse snatcher. And that's the cover. And if you look closely on the cover, you see this little shadow of a hand about to snatch her purse. So there's other things too, but she becomes this amateur sleuth. But along the way, there's these tender stories about her friends and sometimes the demise of her friends. She lives in assisted living. People are old and people are dying, So there's pieces about loss and death, but mostly it's about the value, importance of friendship and then just keeping vibrant. She goes to the gym every couple of days. She She just does things to keep herself a vibrant person. And when the book starts out, she's 89. And then in the book, she turns 90. And then she also takes a transcontinental trip with her granddaughter. And a lot happens on that trip. So I'll leave that as a mystery.
I love it. Well, you know what? I think you're right on the money with all of that. I know my mom and dad got moved into assisted living just last year. And then, of course, my mom passed in January. But I'm so grateful that we moved them in while they were together because they were able to make friendships. And my dad, when she did pass, he wasn't alone. He was already had a group of community and people that he could look forward to seeing every morning. And I think 100% that helped through the grieving process. And it's just been such a joy to see him, thriving there because he feels supported. And it's a really, really great thing.
Well, I'm so happy to hear that. That's not always the outcome. I'm really happy to hear that, Marnie. That's great.
Yeah, and I think so much of it, like what you're saying with the way you approach your life and also the way Martha approaches her life, is it's a mindset issue. My dad is a very positive guy, so he looks for reasons to be happy instead of for reasons to be unhappy. And I think that speaks to everything in our life. What we look to find is what usually shows up in our life.
Absolutely. You attract what you put out and it comes back to you.
Exactly. Well, it's been so fun to learn your story, and I know we chatted a little bit about you have another book coming up. So what's that one about? Tell our listeners what they can expect, and then we'll give them some details on where they can find your books, etc.
It's the next in the Martha series. So it's another Martha book, and it's called Murder Maybe at Martin Manor, because she lives at Martin Manor. So it's a little more of a cozy mystery. It still features Martha. Harold is still there. Most of her friends have either died or departed in other ways, so she's had to make new friends and get a new group together in terms of her investigations and so forth. But it's a fun book, and most people, if they like the first Martha, they're gonna like Martha number 2.
Just so all of the listeners know, Mershon has volunteered to give me a book to give away.
I'm thinking about the Martha book as the giveaway. And then also, I would love to have people sign up for my newsletter, which just comes out once a month. It's about a 2-minute read, and it's fun. It has a recommended book, somebody else's. It has a recipe. It has a health tip, and then another little story.
What we're going to do is we're going to actually give away one of the It's Almost Good to Be Martha books. And what you need to do is go to Apple Podcasts and leave a review of the podcast. And then we will put everybody who left a review within a 30-day period into a draw to get a copy of her book. So that'll be amazing. We're going to actually put all of the details into the show notes. So if you want to join Mershon's email list, so you can get some good book recommendations, great recipes, and some other fun little stories that she shares in her email. Where can they find that? What email can they reach out to you so that they can be a part of that?
Yes, just my name, Mershon Neisner @gmail.com.
Awesome. That's great. So we'll make sure that's all in there so you get the spelling right. And I am so looking forward to hearing when the next book comes out. And thank you so much for spending a little bit of time with me and inspiring us all to keep going, because it's never too late.
It's never too late. So my pleasure, Marnie. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I hope it inspired you or motivated you in some way to keep going and to create your very best life. Want to know what to do next? Share this episode with someone that you love who maybe just needs a little more delicious in their life. Join my free Facebook community over at Mindset Mastery for Midlife Women, where like-minded women come together to support and inspire each other, and where we get to hang out together. And I offer cool bonuses, videos, and some extra content. And lastly, don't forget to subscribe so that when new episodes drop, they'll be queued up and ready for you. In case no one has told you today, there's not one person on this planet that is exactly like you. And the world is a better place because you're here. So thank you for being here. I'll be back next week, and I hope you'll join me right here on Life is Delicious.